now a little Christmas piece called Xmas in the Big Ugly. It was all that it was built up to be, Xmas in the Big Ugly. El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora la Reina de los Ángeles del Rio de Porciúncula. Half our family was sick from respiratory ailments. I mean sick, like chronic and hospital sick. Could it be because they lived downwind from an oil refinery just up the road from Dow Chemical? Could it be because we spent half our life in the Big Ugly? The other half of the family wasn't agoraphobic or ancient. They lived in Bishop in the sticks, and they made a special trip to join us. Xmas in the Big Ugly was kind of cheap last year. People were saying how they scrimped on presents or they got lazy and didn't even make the homemade crap they hand out every year. Even so, it felt like everybody had a good Christmas and made out better than they deserved. Xmas in the Ugly meant food. Lots of overcooked bland food and tons of sweets to gum up the works. Stomach upsets, constipation, diarrhea. Xmas in the Big Ugly, a real workout for the digestive tract. Xmas in the Big Ugly meant travel. Half-blind Gramps driving at night, to get back home where we all sat around listening to the oldsters unravel twice-told tales. Only this time the telling was a bit slower and the mind begins to wander and you wonder why your sister-in-law ain't talking at all. Xmas in the Big Ugly meant small talk and the long wait for it to be over. Xmas in the Big Ugly was kids and more kids, kids wailing and drooling and yelling and throwing things in your face until you felt like kicking them around, or falling in love with 13-year-olds imagining what they'll be like in a few years. Xmas in the Big Ugly was TV, watching movies together and football or digging on the latest computer program, zoning out in front of the boron machine. Xmas in the Big Ugly isn't forever. Eventually you turn it off and it's over, or about one lost weekend and a half afterwards, Xmas in the Big Ugly turns you off. It was a long wait to land back in SF in bad weather, a wait that gave me time to record my thoughts, because everybody else was going back home from the Big Apple, the Big Easy, the Windy City, the Twin Cities, whatever other cities that aren't the Big Ugly, besides the hell of a lot of us coming back from Xmas in the Big Ugly. A screaming baby squirmed behind us as our flight was put in hold. We had a plane with very little fuel, seeing as how it had been late arriving to us and they wanted no more delay in letting us board. They hadn't refueled the thing in Long Beach, so we had just enough fuel to last until 9:10. They wanted to reroute us to Oakland, but we probably would have ended in the Bay, so they let us land at SFO at 9:05. Xmas in the Big Ugly was finally over, except for the fake tree locked up in the basement, the same one the folks drag out every year. Not a Bauhaus fake tree or a Russian futurist one. No, it's a fake tree, looks like a fake tree. Xmas in the Big Ugly is a fake tree that will haunt us as long as there are flooded freeways, as long as there's a moth in the hot tub, as long as there's mold on the fruitcake. Xmas in the Big Ugly. I love it! It's something that takes me back, that's for sure. It's home, all right, and it lasts a long time. Thank you very much. Somebody wrote Satan rules on my garage door, and I just thought, what happens if we do have Satan, rules for Satan? I mean, it would go something like this. All pitchforks must be checked at door. No bewitching, bothering, or bewildering. No writing Dante sucks. No giving off a big stink. Incubus your own table, please. No ringing of hell's bells. No disappearing in a puff of smoke. No running by the lava pits. No playing with fire. No name dropping. No naysaying. You are being videotaped. No shutting off the lights. No changing anybody's medication. No turning my woman into a horned toad. No insider trading. No junk bond hawking. No hostages traded for oil. No arms traded for hostages. No pacts. No scary pets, no pronouncements, no impersonations, no laughing at the wrong time, no talking backwards loudly. Usual strong cap, niklat om. replace current monotheisms. Our next great religion has got to be techno-goddessism. Somehow, somewhere, someone will some way be brilliant enough and beautiful enough to bring us all together with the right stuff and the right technology, and everybody will dig her digitally. Imagine two-way global interactive goddess TV, putting on your tactile suit and becoming one with her in hyperspace, learning to fly with goddess as your co-pilot via the modem. Whose personality will lead us to all this? The techno-goddess. Whose reign will last a millennium or 3? The techno-goddess. Why do they call it the planet? Why do they call it the solar system? The Milky Way galaxy? The universe? It has to be time for the techno-goddess. Lastly, I'd like to bring you to another religion, which we can all get into, I hope. It's called Cash Cult. It's based on my research on cargo cults, which were nativistic religious movements in Melanesia holding that at the millennium, ancestor spirits will bring cargoes of modern goods to believers. Dating from the 19th century, these cults expanded until everybody believed that if you built a landing strip, they would come. You built a dock, they would come, etc. Me read about cargo cults. Me think about how I'll get cargo. Me think burn furniture, then more come. Me think give away TV, get more TVs. But then when cargo come, what happened? Policeman comes, say, why so much cargo? Taxman comes, say, why so much cargo? You got lot cargo, you got lot problem. Hey, no start cargo cult, start cash cult. You go spend money on food, show, nobody care, that's just the way cash is. You spend money on clothes, drinks, you go ball game, you drive Canada, you buy extra large box, extra large condoms, no one care. It cash and cash, not a permanent thing, just like a flower, it come, then it go. Everybody love cash. It's so sad. So be happy and get rid cash. Hey, nobody care where cash come from unless you ends up with cargo, right? So no spend cash, get cargo. Get cargo bad. Oh, get cash, no problem. You understand? Okay, let's go to work. Say after me. We give you all our cash. See, we lose all our cash. Give us cash, we got no cash. Give away cash, best way, get more cash. Give us cash, you get more cash back. Cash will not happen if you keep it. Cash becomes worthless if you keep it. Only way to get cash is get rid cash. Somebody else cash become you cash. We don't know how, but we believe and believe. Alright, let me hear you say alright. They got mad and she smiled. She looked at a one-eyed pyramid roof. She ran green dollars on you like springtime. You understand? You give us cash. You don't understand? You keep cash. But he's not door number 1, door number 2, door number 3 with a box inside a box of made cash. This way, if it works out, then you know how to go drop one day. You get cash this way. Get rid of cash as fast as you can. That's how you get cash. You bet. Thank you very much. Thank you.
that was the right way to start the evening. And now, as usual, in our logical progression here, the next person to be reading will be David Kubrin, who is who had a Guggenheim Fellow Award in 1969, I think. He's a history of science teacher, has taught in college and now teaches in a middle school. And he also designed machinery. And he's the co-author of a book called Earth Mind, published by Harper and Row, and is also finishing up a book on Marxism and witchcraft, which is what he's going to be speaking on tonight. So, David?
Let me see, can I be heard? Okay. First, a correction or two. If you saw the leaflet advertising the event, correction or three. First of all, I won't be talking about the Catholic Church because the subject I'll be relating is England after the Reformation, and so it's Protestantism I'm talking about. Second of all, I don't really see what I'm talking about in the strict sense as a conspiracy. It's more like a confluence of ruling class interests which somehow express themselves historically, and there's some consciousness in that process, but there's also a way in which it's become subterranean and unconscious and not conspiratorial, but I hope that's clear from what I say. And thirdly, I'm not a warlock. Never have been, and won't be, and am not now. I am a witch. In the tradition that I work with, reclaiming, we believe that the warlocks were the people who turned state's evidence back in the time called burning times, when up to estimates range from 250,000 to 9 million, mostly women, were put to death and tortured in early modern Europe. The numbers are unclear because the records are unclear, and we'll never know. At any rate, during those burning times, the people who turned state's evidence were called the warlocks, and they tended to be men. But men could be witches too. So with those clarifications, let me begin. And I call it investments in the sacred. In a fundamental sense, both God and money stem from the same root. At the birth of our modern era, an organic unity existed between the two, a unity in the land and the earth. For the land was identified both with God and with money, though it was by different people and or at different times. Let me explain what I mean. Most of you are familiar, I'm sure, with the Native American sense of the land, a sacred entity in its own right, by no one owned, and on which all creatures live. Life is a gift from this land, from the sacred mother, if you will, to whom all owe their existence. Yet this concept of the earth and the land is not restricted to Native Americans, but is held by most of the people of the planet, particularly in non-industrial societies. In fact, the understanding of the sacredness of the land is held by nearly everyone outside of European culture, and outside, more particularly, of male European culture especially. And this vision has had a significant foothold even there, in Europe, where many areas have localized patron saints who have been renamed and reconsecrated in Christian terms, but who in fact are local goddesses or goddesses, reverence for whom often stretches back to prehistoric times. Across Europe, indeed, stretching from Portugal through Europe to Asia Minor, India, and parts of North Africa, this ancient tradition goes back millennia and is at the root of much subsequent religion. In modern Europe, this tradition was alive, or early modern Europe, this tradition was alive, especially in the countryside, and it coexisted with Christianity. But the birth of capitalism in early modern Europe meant that increasingly land was re-identified with money, more specifically with capital. This is a general pattern in Europe, but was especially true in 16th and 17th century England with the rise of the woolen industry, requiring large-scale sheep raising, and the emergence of deep mining, coal in particular, in 16th and 17th century England. I have lots of facts and figures and proof and whatnot, which the 10-minute time slot we have won't allow me to go into, but just one graph showing what happens with mining. This is 0 tons per year. This is 600,000 tons per year. This is the time period from 1560 to 1700, and this is the amount of coal taken out of the ground. I'm sorry, it's the amount of coal shipped out of Newcastle during that period. And you can see the familiar asymptotic curve of modern development. Land became a resource in the 16th and 17th century to be ruthlessly plundered, robbed, and violated. Land conceived of as property took on a substantial material basis from the middle of the 16th century on, when Henry VIII, breaking with the Roman Catholic Church and desperately in need of funds to pay for his foreign policy adventures, decided to undermine the Roman Catholic Church's power by selling off the huge land holdings of its monastic orders. Overnight, vast amounts of land went on the market, which was a decisive break from feudal concepts of the land, where use but not possession of the land was conferred as part of a pact, mutual obligations being involved on both sides. It was hard to sell a program of the privatization of land to the present peasant population, which had real protections such as short tenure under the old system. It was especially hard to sell this program at a time when the rural population was getting hustled off the land through the process of enclosures, which lasted decades. Force of arms cannot be used continuously to enforce even a theft that by removing people from the land tore the means of subsistence from them. From countless small farmers and peasants in England and Europe over the course of a couple of centuries. It was critical to get the rural population to accept the process. If not liking it, at least they could learn to see it as inevitable. Many of the peasant uprisings in early modern Europe centered around issues of land usage and abusage. Cutting down huge areas of forest where people as well as animals lived, the draining of the fens or the wetlands, taking back of the commons and enclosures brought forth resistance on a large scale, and it played a significant role in the epical 17th century civil war and revolution in England. Early in the century, Oliver Cromwell had emerged in the north as a defender of the fens, as he was called. Contemporary complaints that mining devastated the air, water, and soil are found pretty widely or extensively in early modern Europe. We don't have to wait till Bechtel and the Sierra Club and whatnot to find contemporary complaints and apologetics emerging for what the mining industry is doing. One major mining treatise, for example, of the mid-16th century refers to an Italian law, possibly the one passed, or several of them passed in Florence between 1420 and 1485, against destructive mining activities. And this man, Agricola, writes, "The strongest arguments of the detractors against mining is that the fields are devastated by mining operations. And they argue that the woods and groves are cut down, for there is need of an endless amount of woods for timbers, machines, and the smelting of metals. And when the wood and groves are felled, then they're exterminated, the beasts and birds, very many of which furnish a pleasant and agreeable food for man. Further, when the ores are washed, the water which has been used poisons the brooks and streams, and either destroys the fish or drives them away. Therefore, the inhabitants, on account of the devastation of their fields, woods, groves, brooks, and rivers, find great difficulty in procuring the necessities of life. And by reason of the destruction of the timber, they are forced to greater expense in erecting buildings." If the wheels of progress were not to become mired in the mud of rural resistance, country people needed to be brought to heel. A critical ideological fight occurred in England and on the continent in order to sell the new notion of land as property. Alienable, the highest bidder taking home title and privilege. Land to be mined, quarried, its rivers forever poisoned, its creatures maimed, according to the absolute prerogatives of capital. We know the awful harvest of this way of thinking, for we are living with the last gasping throes of this point of view of property, which emerged some 400 years ago triumphant. It is clear that the forces of developing capitalism in England recognized the need in the emerging colonies to undermine the natives' understanding of the land as a sacred being. The learned wrote treatises to each other in which they identified that belief as a major philosophical and political barrier to their bending the indigenous population to their own profitable will. For they devoutly saw the task of European civilization to be using the slave labor of the Indios to grab their resources, gold, timber, pelts, sugar, copper, and lead, to carry back to Europe. Significantly enough, it would seem that the same voices of European and English culture also recognized the need at home in England and Europe to suppress the very same deeply held concept of the land as sacred, resting place for generations of ancestors, a concept that was very much alive in the popular magic found everywhere in the countryside. The task of the desacralization of the land was an essential first step in opening it up for plunder, as one of the inalienable rights now of free men, to be transmuted, in other words, into capital, the generator of profits. Science, with its new ontology of inert matter as the basis of the physical cosmos, took on the responsibility of teaching the educated classes, and through them the rest of humankind, that essential lesson of inert matter. To a considerable degree, this was a conscious undertaking on the part of the nascent scientific community in Restoration England. For again, we find learned treatises laying out the rationale for their profound redefinition of material reality in terms that make quite explicit the underlying social rationale. Nature inert argues for a citizen's degree that is able to remain passive and docile, in sharp contrast to the highly rebellious population of England during the whole of the century leading up to the Restoration. Scientists of the Royal Society, the center of the scientific community, made a careful enumeration of all the ways that the study of natural philosophy, according to the methodology they were advocating, was in itself the best way of instilling loyalty to established authority. Far better than religious or political concerns, quote, "It was nature alone," wrote someone in 1667, 7 years after the restoration of the monarchy. "It was nature alone which draws our mind off from past or present misfortunes, that never separates us into mortal factions, gives us room to differ without animosity, and permits us to raise contrary ideas about it without any danger of a civil war." What came to a head in England in its civil war and revolution from 1642 to 1660 was on the continent simply a more gradual process, in some areas not reaching a critical stage until as late as the mid-19th century. But everywhere the process was fundamentally the same, and everywhere a new ontology became the basis of modern, essentially bourgeois culture that was based on a mechanical view of reality. Against the pantheistic world of the country people, where every tree, rock, or stream reflected the wonders of the creation, the many new voices of philosophical moderation put forth the doctrine that reality at the deepest level consisted only of matter and motion of the underlying atoms or particles that form the cosmos. For any particular thing, it was the amount of its matter and motion, quantitative measures of the world only, that defined it. All else, the colors, sounds, textures, smells, were only secondary. The world was said to consist only of inert, passive bodies. John Kyle, a disciple of Isaac Newton, explained at the beginning of the 18th century that, quote, "Every mutation induced in a natural body proceeds from an external agent. For every body is a listless heap of matter and cannot induce any motion in itself." In other words, according to the mechanical philosophy, matter, in essence incapable of self-activity, is dead. All change came from without. There were several interrelated and supportive campaigns that had to be carried on at the same time for the transformation of land from a holy mother to the source of the almighty buck. All had in common a reconstituting of culture so that the tendencies towards open rebellion that broke out across Europe at the birth of the modern era could be cut off at their roots. The code word was enthusiasm. It was enthusiasm that had led masses to rise up to demand a new social order, or to proclaim a reign of the saints to rule over a new Jerusalem. To sever the roots of enthusiasm, a major reform of the language was undertaken. The new style had to consist of a more direct, less effeminate style of discourse, built of sentences all framed around a common architecture of subject, verb, and object, and where the enemy, ambiguity in discourse, was sabotaged by a new doctrine of a one-to-one correspondence of words and things, so that each word referred uniquely only to one object, and each object had a word assigned to it. This new form of language, masterminded from the Royal Society, which was founded at the Restoration, was shockingly effective. In fact, the prose and poetry undergoes a radical transformation. Whereas before we had Marlowe, Spencer, Milton, and Donne, not to mention Shakespeare, defining the language in the decades leading up to the Civil War, afterwards we are left with Dryden, Pope, Swift, and Sterne. The purpose of the new purified language was to make impossible any return of the kinds of divine frenzies that had characterized the Civil War, where, quote, the wildest and most enthusiastic fanaticism had possessed men and women during the quote, passions and madness of that dismal age. Music was another area where a fundamental reconceptualization, including new theories of harmony, undercut the kinds of effective states previous music had induced. Here, too, those states in the years after the Civil War were seen as in themselves destructive of the social order. Underlying the reformulations of science, language, and music was a social process that lasted nearly 2 centuries to reform popular culture in general. For the population were associated with beliefs, values, and actions that stood as barriers to the new prerogatives of capital. Thus,
a little background there. There you go, David Kubrin speaking on. Before I bring up the next reader, I'm going to throw in one quick lyric here so that we kind of bring up the poetry along with the prose. This is a poem about a lay saint in the state of Sinaloa in Mexico, in the town of Culiacan, which is the center of the narcotics trade, the opium trade in Mexico. And this is a gentleman who has his own shrine. He's a lay saint. People come and rub his head, which is in a glass box, and leave offerings for him. The church hates him. His name is Jesus Malverde. And this is the story of Jesus Malverde. Malverde means bad green because Malverde was a bandit who used to leap from the roadside dressed in banana leaves and strip the rich of their wealth and then distribute it amongst the poor. This is the story of Jesus Malverde, a man who once upon a time was hung in a public place for feeding the poor with the silverware he looted from the filthy rich, and who ever after descended skywards in a miracle of wings. 7 decades later, the poor of Culiacan, who are still poor and have never left town, come early and often to Malverde's shrine down by the railroad tracks with candles and coins, camarones and paper flores, to drop a stone and rub his head in a glass box, whisper secrets into his deaf ear, and toss their crutches high, high into the blue, blue heavens, hopping about deliriously cured to the toe-tapping pa of the brass band the narco-traficantes pay to play night and day in honor of the old bandit, for having converted a small handful of the poor in pocket into very rich men who live in strongly fortified marble mansions and sell potent drugs to the Norte Americanos for great profit. Hallelujah! The miracle of Malverde taking flight forever. I want to bring up a colleague of mine. I'm an investigative reporter, and I want to bring up the news editor of the San Francisco Weekly, Vince Bielski, who's going to talk on the real agenda of the right wing. We've heard a little bit of history about the subjugation of witches from David Kubrin. Now let's find out exactly what the witch hunt looks like amongst us today. Vince? Thank you. Okay. Vince Bielski from San Francisco Weekly.
everybody, well, I have a bit of a clarification too. I am not a warlock, nor am I a witch, nor am I a poet. I am a journalist, and from the time of enclosures to the development of Silicon Valley, journalists have been considered thieves. What we do is we talk to people, we steal their ideas, we write them down, we put our name on the top, and we claim them as our own. So, essentially, what I'm going to be talking about are the ideas that I have taken from the Christian right. For about the last 6 months or so, I have been reporting on these people, and I'd like to tell you a little bit of a story. 1992 was a very successful year for the Christian fundamentalists in California. Anyone who saw the Republican National Convention witnessed the spectacle in all its glory and color. It was also a very interesting time to report on the Christian right in California. Primarily because as a journalist it gave me really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to actually quote God in one of my stories. Now, I didn't speak to God, there was a scheduling problem, but I did speak to Deirdre Holiday. And Deirdre Holiday spoke to God, and I spoke to her, so that's how I made the connection. Deirdre Holiday is a real person. She's a fundamentalist Christian, and she lives in San Diego County. She's a mother of 4, she works as a nurse, and recently she was elected to the school board in a small county in San Diego, in a small city in San Diego. Now, I was interested in why Deirdre Holiday decided to become a politician, so I rang her up. I gave her a call and I asked her the question. She paused, she was very nice. I can almost see her kind of platinum blonde bouffant as I talk about her right now. And she said, well, Vince, it was something like this. She worked for Operation Rescue. She used to distribute these little flyers to women as they walked into abortion clinics with pictures of fetuses on them. And she said, you know, Vince, so earnestly, she said, I just didn't feel like I was making enough change. Change, we all heard a lot about that. She said that what she really wanted to do was make structural change in our society, so she thought it would be a good idea to become a politician. And I said, well, that's interesting, I can understand that. I said, well, what next? And she said, well, but I wasn't sure because I needed permission. And things were getting more and more interesting, and I said, well, permission from whom? And she said, well, from God. And I said, wow. I got a great story, keep talking. So I was, as a thief, I was writing down, oh, come on, anything now, whatever you say, it's going to make my editor very happy. Well, she said that what she needed from God was a message. And this was great. I mean, here we've got, on the one hand, God as political consultant, giving her candidate a message, and I was really curious as to what this message might be. And I was, of course, hoping it would be something great like, an earthquake in a monsoon striking San Francisco and wiping all the heathens away, letting her know that her time had come. But these Christian fundamentalists are very modest people, and what she really wanted from God was for him to change the day of the school board meeting from Wednesday to Thursday. Well, okay. Well, I guess God can do that. He did a lot of, he could pull that one off. So I said, well, Deirdre, being a kind of prying person who doesn't respect people's privacy, because of course that's what a journalist is, I said, well, what happened? Did God, grant your wish? And for the next 2 months, he didn't, or she didn't, I should say. What happened was, she just went about her business, and she was nervous, and she didn't know what to do. Then one day, in one of her rare moments of spontaneity, she picked up the phone and called the school district, and guess what? The school board meeting had been changed. Well, the rest is history. She ran and she won. And the reason I'm talking about Deirdre tonight is because I think she represents what is the new wave in Christian fundamentalism in this country and in California, which is a very grassroots strategy to win local office. It's a strategy which shuns Washington as a corrupt bastion of useless politicians. And to put this in perspective, what I call a new wave of fundamentalism, we should go back to 1980 and take a look at what was going on in the United States politically then. Ronald Reagan was elected. The names Jerry Falwell and Jim Baker were becoming household names. And after Reagan's election, what happened was that Christians, activists from around the country, flocked to Washington like, flies to horse shit, wanting to basically begin their social revolution. It really began years prior, it began really in 1980, thereabout. Anyways, what happened for the next 10 years is they set up an amazing amount of organizations. There were institutes, nonprofit organizations, think tanks, all set up in Washington, D.C. The main focus at that time for the Christian right was Nicaragua. It's interesting to think about Dan Quayle at this point, because during this period, Dan Quayle was a senator, and as a senator, he was very involved with Oliver North. And what Dan Quayle was doing at this point was essentially bringing Christian activists from Central America and from the United States to meet Oliver North and to set up his Contra network. Well, from about 1986 and 1987, what's beginning to happen for the Christian fundamentalists is they're seeing that they're winning the war in Central America, and in fact they end up winning the war in Nicaragua, but the social agenda here at home isn't happening. Ronald Reagan lets them down. Abortion is still legal, and America is still a sinning country, and something has to be done. So as fast as they descended on the nation's capital, thousands of activists began retreating back to their cities. In this case, I'm most concerned with California, and that's what I was looking at. So come about 1988, 1989, strategies are beginning to form on the local level on how the Christian fundamentalists can elect people to local office. Deirdre Holliday fits perfectly into that strategy. What she did was essentially defy all common wisdom and strategy on how to get elected. When the media would call her, she would hang up the phone. When she was invited to political forums to talk to people, she would refuse to go. And she wasn't alone. There were about 60 Christian fundamentalists at the time in San Diego County who were doing just what she was doing. And most of them won by carrying out what has been called a stealth strategy, which is basically you ignore everything that is mainstream and you concentrate on your own base. What she did do to win is essentially follow in the footsteps of Jesse Jackson. In the 1980s, Jesse Jackson went through the South, went into black churches, and essentially recruited volunteers for the Democratic Party and voters. She did the same thing, and the other Christian fundamentalists today are doing the same thing in the fundamentalist churches. Well, for her, it was a sweeping victory. And in 1991, political pundits were referring to the San Diego model because all of a sudden 60 people who had never run for office before, who were fundamentalist Christians, had taken power. The early 90s saw a lot of other successes for the Christian fundamentalists. There was, I think, the most important victory which led to the convention was the takeover of the state Republican Party in California. Essentially what happened was, using the same strategy, they got themselves elected county by county and eventually controlled the majority of counties in California. And I think the best kind of example of the power that they had was at the 1990 State Republican Convention. They burned Pete Wilson in effigy, which I thought was a really nice little touch. The grassroots movement, I think, is having its largest impact today on the issue of education in California. Just last week, the state issued new guidelines for educating the kids in California public schools, and there was a very big debate over homosexuality and how the school textbooks and how the teachers are to deal with this. Well, essentially the Christian right was able to very much weaken the language in all references to gays and lesbians and to AIDS in state schools, textbooks, and in educational material. And in another, I think, very important victory, the Christian right, I think, played an instrumental role in the recent indictment of the state school chief, Bill Honig. As you may know, Bill Honig will go up on criminal charges in January. He was indicted on a conflict of interest charge, but essentially for 2 years before this indictment, the Christian right was gunning for his head, and activists around the country were lobbying to see that to try to weaken his power. Essentially what happened was they contacted Dan Lundgren's office and made it known that they wanted Bill Honig's head. Dan Lundgren, who's the state attorney general who indicted Bill Honig, is a very strong follower of the Christian fundamentalists in California, and he also has his eyes on the governorship of this state. So Dan Lundgren is somebody to keep your eyes on, and the Christian right certainly is banking on him. In addition to the attack on Honig, I think that the fundamentalists also, within the fundamentalist movement, there's also a much more radical wing, which we don't hear a lot about, but they call themselves the Reconstructionists. And what the Reconstructionists are essentially a cult within Christian fundamentalism. and they introduced a lot of ideas to the movement. Some of their ideas were later realized in the voucher initiative, which didn't pass this year, but which some of you may have heard about. It's essentially allowing parents to keep their kids home from school and also not using withholding their tax money to educate their own kids, and essentially creating a two-tier educational system. Well, the interesting thing about the Reconstructionists is that they base their values and their blueprint for society on the Old Testament. The Old Testament, as probably all of you know, can be very punitive when it comes to things like homosexuality and adultery. It calls for death by stoning. So next time I go to San Diego and my friend Larry asks me to get stoned, I'll think twice. But beyond that, I don't think they're really much of a threat. But they're interesting to keep your eye on. I also want to, I think perhaps the most interesting aspect, for me the most interesting thing about the Christian right is not their own influence, but how they fit into the larger political system in this country. They have rose to prominence at about the same time that other grassroots organizations and movements have come to the fore in essentially challenging our two-party system, our representative system of government, which essentially isn't participatory. We elect representatives, but most people can't participate. So I think there are very strong parallels between the Christian right movement on the right, the Green Party on the left, which essentially is doing the exact same thing as the Christian right, and of course Ross Perot, who occupies the middle, the suburban middle. I think the Christian right essentially is one wing of a larger populist movement, which is vying at this point to have some kind of influence and sway in our political system. So that was that. Where does the future lead? Where are they taking us? I think that the state convention was probably the great show for the Christian right in this country, and probably their last hurrah. I think what happened essentially in 1992 was that George Bush was confronted with a problem, which is he really didn't have anything to run on. The economy was stunk, so he, looking for other ideas, he adopted these ideas which were percolating up from below, family values and the like. They were, universally trounced in the election. And I think the message here is, on a national level, Christian fundamentalism is not going to be a force, but they will, I think, politically remain a force in our country on the local level. And I think of two examples. Measure 9 in Oregon, which was defeated, which everybody probably knows about, which essentially would remove protections against discrimination against gays and lesbians. Of course, a similar but somewhat weaker measure did win in Colorado in November. And beyond that, I think the abortion issue will continue to be a very strong avenue for the Christian right to, vent its anger. And it's interesting that 1992 set a record for the bombings on abortion clinics in the United States. So in some ways, the grassroots violence and the grassroots activity continues to grow stronger. If you were to ask the Christian right, and if you were to ask Deirdre Holliday where she thinks all this is going, she would point to Armageddon, which is this. Fundamental to their belief is that we will eventually find ourselves in Armageddon, when the army of the Antichrist and the true believers will clash, the world will be destroyed, and God's kingdom will emerge on earth. And I was talking to Deirdre about this, and I said, well, Deirdre, what does this mean for you? And she said something like, well, some of us believe that it's like you'll be driving on the freeway and you'll be in a traffic jam, and then all of a sudden God will just pull you right up to heaven. And I must say, I began to see the appeal of Christian fundamentalism at that point. Thank you.
God and money, peddling influence. Speaking of peddling influence, I should mention here that the National Writers Union exists to peddle influence on behalf of freelance writers in the publishing industry. Probably make a few more pitches before the evening is over, but the Writers Union grieves, that is, they try to collect money for writers who have been stiffed by the publishing industry, whether it's magazines or book publishing companies, and have collected close to $1 million now nationally for the members. So that's the main work of the Writers Union, along with getting the industry to take freelance writers seriously, because we contribute substantially to what's left of the written press in this country, and long live it. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Merle Kessler, aka Ian Scholes, who's a humor columnist for the San Francisco Examiner. Writers come in many shapes and sizes. Here's one.
Actually, I'm just another guy in a hat. Kind of a witch journalist poet combo. When I was a young Protestant growing up in North Dakota, God meant less to me than pocket change. Money was deliverance, money was salvation, the road to heavens, secular and holy, was paved with earthly pennies. Pennies do not rain from heaven, manna maybe, but never on the bleak plains of the Dakotas. On the ground, he just found Germans and Norwegians eking out a living in a cold, godforsaken country where he had to move glacier-drop boulders as big as a house just to plant wheat. That's where the money came from in North Dakota, wheat, oil, missile silos. Many of the missiles of our national defense system were embedded in North Dakota. There were too few people living there to object. And why would they? North Dakota's Germans and Norwegians had a worldview best summed up as, "We'll be dead soon." Nuclear war? We probably deserve it. The only other people in North Dakota were either Indians, kept well hidden from sensitive white boys like me, or migrant workers, bitter, drunken men with tattoos who like to throw each other through plate glass windows on Saturday night. And North Dakota is home to Fort Buford, where Sitting Bull, the great Sioux warrior, was gunned down like a dog, about an hour's drive from my hometown. So this is why I had a paper out. I was hoping to save up enough money to buy a one-way ticket to Hollywood, California. It's always better to be on the side of the fence making up lies than on the side getting them fed to you. Even then, I knew Hollywood was the falsehood capital of the world. Plus, it didn't have blizzards or Norwegians, near as I could tell. Every weekday, rain or shine, Norwegians or blizzards, I'd load up my ink-stained paper bag with the Daily Herald and slog through mud to bring the best in local news to various retired couples on fixed incomes. Now, there were a few families who subscribed, but by and large, if you were anywhere under the age of, say, 50, you had no interest in the local news, especially if it cost you money. You were putting your pennies away for that one-way ticket to Hollywood, California, Billings, Montana, Salt Lake City, Utah, anywhere. If you attended enough Lutheran dinners of left-centered lutefisk, Mormons start to look pretty goddamn good. Yes, among Protestants in North Dakota, even the food was white. Now, don't misunderstand, I wasn't raised a Lutheran, Methodist, or Baptist. I was raised in the United Church of Christ, commonly called the Congregational Church, the blandest church in America, after the Unitarians, of course, where grape juice and little cubes of Wonder Bread served as the blood and body of Jesus Christ, who was never called Savior or Lamb of God or Son of Man in our services. I don't remember what he was called or why he was significant, really. There were paintings of the guy all over the basement. They looked like covers from Saturday Evening Post. A good-looking, slightly glowing young man badly in need of a haircut. Church seemed to serve as an excuse to assemble in the basement every Sunday, drink weak-boiled coffee, and talk about the weather while your kids got in fistfights in the vestry or on the church lawn, weather permitting. When I got old enough to go to confirmation classes, being a thoughtful kid, I had a lot of questions for Dr. Glick, our minister. Questions like, if there's a God, why do children starve? Why do I have to wear shiny, ill-fitting shoes and a clip-on necktie every Sunday? I can't be fooling God with a clip-on necktie. Why does he suffer this charade to continue? Why am I flunking algebra, not to mention suffering hurricanes, dust storms, and the retard murdered in his shack at the garbage dump? Why, Reverend Glick? Why? Well, Reverend Glick looked thoughtful, and then he said, you didn't memorize the Apostles' Creed like you were supposed to, did you? Well, the old bastard had me. I thought I could bluff my way out of my homework by attacking the premises on which it was based. Kind of a North Dakota version of deconstruction, but he'd seen right through me. You might say he was a North Dakota version of omniscient. He even looked a little bit like God if God were to favor $2 haircuts and brown suits. The point is, when I was a kid, religion was something to be gotten out of. There's none of this God the Father whose name either can't be spoken in the one hand or taken in vain on the other, depending which side of the Judeo-Christian fence your dogmatic cows grazed on. God wasn't even a concept by which we measured our pain. God was just an excuse to build churches. We didn't have churches where we drink our wheat boiled coffee and talk about the weather. If all this sounds stifling, well, of course it was. But keep in mind, there was a hell of a lot to stifle. These were the Dakotas, where Wild Bill Hickok, railroad men, wildcatters, drifters, and desperate dreamers on the lam hung their Stetsons and feed caps. I wasn't supposed to know about it, but I knew that one Saturday night in the back room out at the State Line Club, a member of our congregation, a chiropractor, got involved in an epic poker game with my best friend's father, an unfriendly pharmacist who wouldn't let his kids call him father, but made them all call him Ray. Well, Ray wound up winning the chiropractor's house on the last hand. Imagine that. Coming home, half in the bag at dawn on a cold winter night, wake up the wife to tell her, honey, I lost the house in a poker game. How about some breakfast? I knew his son, too. I never saw him again after that weekend. They were gone, off like a shot. Man, I envied that. Losing the house on a foolish wager is what it took to get out of that town. I wanted my father to take up poker. Unfortunately, my father explained to me we were mere renters on a yearly lease. Remember that, all you Generation X homeowners out there. You know who you are. You've got to lose something before you have nothing to lose. Ray promptly sold the house he'd won, used the money to buy his own drugstore, whereupon he dumped his wife and had kids like a bad habit, took up with a registered nurse named Barb, who showed a lot of gum when she smiled. Despite this minor flaw in her beauty, she was the subject of many early masturbatory fantasies on the basis of brief glimpses of her chugging bad coffee in the church basement. North Dakota was a bit behind the times, you see. In the late 50s, the concept of divorce was still a bit erotic, about as erotic as it gets in North Dakota. Although the people of North Dakota, my people, by and large, weren't real good at sin, they still thought of themselves as sinners. Take my grandmother, for example, Anna, a religious woman. From all reports, the exact nature of her beliefs remained hidden from me. She spoke no English. I knew that she had fled Germany with her family, proletarians all, for all you Marxists out there, during World War I to escape, well, World War I, and arrived in Russia just in time for the revolution. So, they fled to North Dakota, the Siberia of the United States, where she thanked God every day that she and her family were only miserable and frostbitten, not cannon fodder. So she had a certain joy of spirit, or as close to esprit as a German can be expected to get. My grandfather Jacob, on the other hand, after my grandmother died, used to write us letters in broken English that he was waiting for the Lord to call him home. Fun, Grandpa! Nobody in my family was one to seize the day, roar with lusty laughter, or dance on the beach with Zorba, to be frank about it. Move the boulder, eat your gruel, wait for Jesus, fahren macht Glück, as they say. Experience makes luck. That's probably why North Dakota doesn't have a lottery. And those who did sin didn't view themselves as sinners. Break it down into luck, good and bad, winning and losing. On my paper route, I had a unique opportunity to observe both at work. The swaggering winners were the junior high school boys who hung out at the Little Hut, a filthy malt shop run by a fat young man in Coke bottle glasses and a Hawaiian shirt, no matter what the weather. They'd smoke cigarettes and swagger in their seats, and girls were entirely absent. I envied those godless pubescents enormously, even going so far as to purchase for $2 from a wiry 13-year-old kid named Mike who had Elvis hair and a following. A pornographic photograph, presumably taken by his father, of a woman in clunky shoes and a 40s haircut, otherwise naked, smiling nervously at the camera in an attic of some kind. She looked cold, which again is about as erotic as it gets in North Dakota. Anyway, these kids were the winners. If I'd lived there long enough to go to high school, these would have been the kids who would travel long miles on weekends to get beer and engage in vicious fistfights with their ilk in other towns. They were the other side of the cold northern races, the warrior side, the Vikings, the shock troops, the berserkers and blitzkriegers, sackers, pillagers, and hockey players, strutting in the full power of their youth. And I could see the consequences of hell raising just across the street from the Little Hut, a stop on my paper route I called the Old Men. Jesus, I dreaded collecting there. It was a boarding house populated entirely by rummies, smelly old guys with stained monkey pants. Though I could see dozens of old-timers snoozing at ugly furniture through the battered window, where there were only 2 of them who would ever answer the door. Never did learn their names. One was a pale number of 80-something who'd blink at me as if I was an alien whenever I'd ask for money. His trick was he'd mumble and close the door. I'd wait around for 5-10 minutes. Sometimes he'd remember and come back with the 3 months' worth of money he owed me. Most of the time, I'd give up and move on. The other guy was a little wiry guy. I like to think now he's what Mike from the Little Hut would look like in 60 years. He had nose hair as thick as a shrub and gave off a stench of urine and whiskey that can make me stagger just remembering it. I hated it even worse when he answered the door because he was always too drunk to understand even what I was talking about. Well, to make a long story short, this paper route thing wasn't the cash cow I'd hoped it would be. The House of Rummies wasn't the only deadbeat in my route. Many old people, devout in their beliefs, sober in their habits, were still deaf enough not to heed my summons and stiff me for weeks at a time. This was very frustrating to an 11-year-old. I was a preteen, for Christ's sake. I had not mastered the techniques of credit management. I still haven't, as far as that goes. thrown my youthful tendency to throw away my profits on sugar babies and issues of Magnus Robot Fighter, and you had yourself a lad who had turned his back on shame, sin, God, and worship purely at the altar of a disposable income which did not technically belong to him. It's only luck, I think, I didn't grow up to be an embezzler. But let me describe my Saturday mornings. Nobody's ever written, to my knowledge, on the importance of Saturday mornings in the psyches of pre-adolescent young men. This was the time when Playboy magazines were shoplifted, trash cans sifted through, and money from allowances and paper routes tendered in exchange for treasured items. James Bond paperbacks, comic books, bizarre candies, Richard Matheson short story collections, stunning music. The entire process of spending money was mystical to me. Dollar bills with their trust in God, pictures of one-eyed pyramids and intricate engravings were a source of awe. They were made of special paper. Each piece representing gold and silver in Fort Knox, a place so important Goldfinger himself tried to rob it. Gold and silver, cousins to the sun and to the moon. I used to read books about the Secret Service, who in addition to defending the president are also charged with tracking down counterfeiters. I remember reading a story about a man who used to spend a year hand-inking a dollar bill. A year! Painstakingly doing every line in his miserable big city hovel. Then he'd go to his local bar and spend it. The art was in the spending, you see. And the money's being convincing. Unfortunately, the last time he did it, he put his counterfeit bill in a puddle of beer and the ink ran. He was busted. The Secret Service felt terrible about it. They knew he was an artist. But after all, the law is the law. Once we show mercy, the flood of lawlessness will break through the dams of civilization like the Missouri River in springtime. It all begins with one drop. One drop is all it takes. So, Saturday mornings, 3 hours compose the most important hours of the week. All mine were shot. I had to spend them giving a share of paper out earnings to the front office of the Daily Herald, to a bitter chain-smoking man in a white nylon shirt whose function I never could quite figure out. After that was my confirmation class. I believe in Peggy Prince, a lovely smart girl in teardrop eyeglasses and neck brace, who I probably would have eventually married and abandoned for a chippy around about this time if I'd remained in North Dakota, would lean over and whisper to me, "God the Father! God the Father!" Right. And after that, a trip to the orthodontist. Dr. Horace Arthur Jones. You see, on my 8th birthday, I broke my front tooth in half and I ran up the slippery side of the slide and I slipped. This led to a complicated series of dental engagements, which led in turn to caps, abscesses, ligatures, and even actual dentures from grades 8 through 10. But every Saturday, I would sit in the chair of Dr. Horace Arthur Jones, just him and me, no dental assistants, no receptionist, no anxious leafing through Highlights magazine. He'd fill my mouth with soft, gooey science and tell me stories while I flattened my back waiting for science to harden in my mouth. Dr. Jones had godlike powers over my life. He'd stand by the open window smoking unfiltered Camels and tell me how much he hated dentistry. He used to be a history teacher, he'd tell me. I teach boys your age, hated it, but it was a hell of a lot better than this. Mercifully, I've forgotten everything he told me, though I know it included his entire teaching experience, bad patients he'd had, how his first marriage ended, and how America wasn't really dealing properly with pinkos. I do recall him saying that the world was going to run out of oil by the year 1971 and that Governor Pat Brown of California was a communist. Being exposed to his worldview for 2 hours every Saturday had the advantage, I suppose, of turning me into a lifelong Democrat. The very thought of voting for a Republican makes my mouth hurt. Remember, I used to have nightmares about communists and dinosaurs parachuting from the skies as I hid terrified in a basement while my teeth crumbled into dust. Then one day, I came for my appointment and he was gone. The place was locked up. I pounded at the door, nobody answered. He was gone. He'd blown town without telling anybody and nobody ever heard from him again. Now he had more power over my life than God ever had. Oh sure, that's an exaggeration. God is in the details. God's in his heaven, all's right with the world. God sits in judgment on us all. Time is God's artifact. Well, I'm not a mystic. I'm not a man of faith. God is in our teeth, or God is nowhere at all. God might move in mysterious ways, but hey, what doesn't? How do you know the difference between God and everything else? In the small Midwestern town where I grew up, exposed to every element, there was a man we all called Special Ed, who'd wheel around a rusty grocery cart packed tight with boxes and glittering glass. Rumor had given him a fortune in loose change stacked neatly behind the flattened soup cans that wallpapered his shack at the city dump. I'd see him nearly every day after school as I stood in an alley doorway waiting for the final edition so I could begin my route. Whitey, the guy who hauled the papers off the press, looked a lot like Clu Gulager. Elvis, yet suave. He'd bundle stacks and shout jokes about the clatter while Special Ed grinned in the alley, binding earthly jetsam to his cart with twine. One day, Whitey said to me from the side of his mouth, ask Special Ed how the Yankees are doing. Oh, why? Ask him, see what happens. So I asked Special Ed how the Yankees were doing. His smile switched off like a light. He dropped his boxes, picked up a bottle, and came for me. I ran up the fire escape and stood on the top landing where I jumped up and down screaming, "Yankee, Yankee, Yankee!" in that special bravado which fear and surprise engender in junior high school boys. At the same time, Special Ed shouted something about an aunt in Chicago who'd come in her Cadillac to get me if I didn't leave him alone as he stood at the bottom of the stairs hurling his precious empties. They twinkle in the air 3 feet from my head, then fall to the cement, shards spraying like sparks of ice. I could see below me through the grating Whitey choking on his Chesterfield, bent double with laughter. Finally, Special Ed stormed off, to smile again the very next day as though nothing had happened. Having a boy's cockiness, I wouldn't have apologized even if I'd known what I'd done wrong, but I never mentioned Yankees around Special Ed again. A few weeks later, Whitey was going on about what women need based on his personal experience when I was struck by a thought. Would Flo Gulager brag about his sex life to a paper boy? Hell no! I immediately stopped listening and began to plan what to buy with the day's meager profits. A slowpoke? The new Sergeant Rock? When the headline of the day thundered off the press toward me. It said, "Local figure found dead," above a fuzzy photograph of Special Ed in his cart. He'd been killed for the rumor of his fortune, and his killer arrested when he tried to sell Special Ed's grocery cart to the Piggly Wiggly. I skimmed the story, mouth open, as Whitey scooped pages up and shouted one about an ugly salesman and a woman who'd do anything to get off the farm. Now, picture this. My Cub Scout troop on a field trip to the city jail. That's me in the middle, the one without any badges. Watch us file down the stone hallway in our little blue uniforms to stand each in turn on a stack of empty Coke cartons and peer through a cell window at a greasy, skinny man sitting on a bunk, hands gripping his thighs, eyes on the floor. That's the killer. There he is. And there's the stern guard tugging my arm. I step down, and another joyful civic student jumps to the bars to take his instructive peek at a dim-wit sociopath. But who was the biggest fool here? The killer with his idiot greed, the Boy Scouts sneaking up on his shame, the public servants who made a killer public property to be viewed like a figure in a wax museum, poor Special Ed who tried to make a life for himself with the discarded trash of Yankees, Whitey, me? Now that Whitey's pushing 60 now, a bad father, a worse husband, a mean drunk, I can picture his paunch, his face smeared with newsprint, gray as smeared ink. Maybe a man like this was the original bad Yankee, the Yank who first haunted Special Ed, the one who first created Special Ed's buttons, the kind you push. I know he's my worst nightmare, this paper man who thinks he's seen it all, showing off his little shop-worn tricks of cruelty to all the open boys as he pulls the bad news from a hot machine. There are many movements, from tree to pencil, pencil to paper, paper to poem, from silver to paper to goods, tooth to toothbrush, youth to death, press to printed word, creed to greed. These are the coins we spend. We spend, we swoon, we surrender to something larger than ourselves whenever we come, whenever we spend, whenever we pray. What are these operations, to use a word dear to the postmodern heart? I don't know. I don't pray. God has never spoken to me, but I know in my postmodern heart this truth. We've all gathered at the marketplace trying to cop some magic beans, and we forgot to bring the cow. Gotta go.
Well, I would say that somehow captured pretty much God and money peddling influence, at least from one aspect, simultaneously elevating the northern prairies of the United States to the verbal capital of the world, probably. We're going to take just a 5-minute break to change some tapes.
Well, the Hats are winning 3-2. The flyer for tonight's event had me listed as exposing the commercialization of the New Age movement, which is a worthy enough topic, but when I thought about it for a while, I sort of realized it's sort of like shooting fish in a barrel. So I think we can take it for granted that the so-called New Age movement is totally commercialized. Whether it's crystals or brain machines or expensive weekend seminars or $4 a minute 1-900 numbers for psychic consultations, the stink of commerce pervades the New Age. So we're all agreed on that. So I thought a much more interesting question would be, is whether, despite all the commercialization in commodities, is there some kernel of value hidden in the New Age? In other words, does the New Age deserve more than a sneer? So I'd like to answer that question by drawing a few parallels between 60s leftist politics and the New Age. The New Left in the 60s served as a generic label covering everyone with radical pretensions, from the weathermen and yippies to the careful academics of studies on the left. Similarly, in the 80s and 90s, the New Age has become an umbrella term, covering CDs, videos, crystals, books, seminars, channelers, astrologers, UFOs, and transpersonal psychologists. But besides sharing similar umbrellas, both the New Left and the New Age have struck me as exercises in millenarian yearning. This boils down to the notion that history is reaching some sort of climax, whether it's an imminent workers' revolution, or global disaster, or the age of the Aquarius. In any case, something big is going to happen soon. The year 2000 is rushing towards us, and people's expectations seem to take both pessimistic and optimistic forms. I'm afraid the New Age may be this millennium's optimism of choice. For those of us who are busy being pessimistic over the ozone layer, the New World Order, and the destruction of the rainforests, the fragile hope of the New Agers' paradigm shifts and harmonic convergences seem little more than an irritating whistling in the dark. The New Left is long gone, though we've still got its lineal descendants populating the progressive politics of 1992. But say what you will about the New Age, and most people I know have little good to say, the concept certainly has staying power. These days, anything that lasts in the imagination and memory of the public for longer than a year or two has either struck some deep chord worth looking into, or has an awfully good public relations agency at work behind the scenes. Shirley MacLaine probably has both. So, assuming that the New Age is here for the duration, why is it here and what good is it anyway? For starters, I'd like to assert that the preoccupations of mass culture, such as TV, movies, pop music, the pundits, Oprah, Geraldo, are insufficient for the task of providing meaning to most people's lives. Yet for most of us who can't bring ourselves to go to church or temple and who aren't members of a 12-step group, the fleeting ghosts of pop culture, perhaps a pinch of politics, and career building are all we have. And this means that sooner or later we're likely to stumble into a gaping hole of meaninglessness and depression. At such a point, neither the new REM album nor a Molly Ivins column are sufficient to address one's darkest doubts about God, the world, or oneself. Only a hard-won sense of one's place in the universe and of the basic coherence of existence can provide an emotional and spiritual anchor for someone adrift on the sea of alienation. Mainstream religion used to provide the service of personal and cultural integration, but its allure has badly faded of late. So, into this vacuum, New Age philosophy has rushed, strewing crystals left and right. But at least they've had the virtue of suggesting that the events of one's life form part of a bigger picture that is not at the mercy of literal readings of Bible scripture or of scientists and lab coats. Rather, this bigger picture is prefigured in our dreams and is responsive to our own efforts. This strays remarkably close to earlier eras' ideas of prayer and divine grace, but with God turned into a rather fuzzy essence. This fuzziness seems to come from the marketing notion that only the most generic euphemisms for religious concepts are capable of scoring the biggest ratings. Talking about God in any specific sense might squelch the momentum and hurt sales, after all. This obsession with quantity, which seems to characterize the New Age, is certainly all American, and curiously enough makes for strange parallels with radical politics. The 100th monkey myth, which you may have heard of, which implies that at a certain quantitative point, a critical mass in human consciousness is reached, and a profound change in world consciousness occurs, is first cousin to the Marxist fixation on dialectical leaps, that is, revolutions, occurring when enough workers gain class consciousness. Similarly, the preoccupation of the visionary planners of mass events such as the harmonic convergence with ensuring cosmic success and world change through sheer numbers of mellow meditators harkens back to the much ballyhooed birth of Woodstock Nation back in '69, which was supposed to change the world forever. Well, hope does spring eternal. Now, I'll admit that I find some New Age elements attractive and important, such as a concern with self-knowledge, with spiritual paths, and with alternatives to materialism and war. However, these elements each preceded the marketing of the New Age and will no doubt outlast it. But for the New Age to admit this sort of squelches the momentum. The New Age shares this reluctance to get real with all the other social movements of our era. With all of them, there is an extremely fine line between creating a momentum with which to attract the media's attention and then taking the media-generated image for reality. Movement leaders decide that there should be a movement, present themselves to the media as voices for the movement, attract crowds at demonstrations, or to buy products, as the case may be, and then continue to speak of the movement as an ongoing force long after the crowds have gone home. Yet if one can speak of a movement at all, it has little to do with the leaders, the ideology, or the demonstrations. Rather, it has to do with a large segment of the population changing its everyday behavior because it simply seemed like the sensible thing to do. In this sense, if there is a New Age movement, it is embodied in a large number of people operating from a deeper set of values, which may be admirable, but it has little or nothing to do with the New Age stars booked into whole life expos or workshops dwelling on paradigm shifts. Yet, ironically, given our all-American tendency to parade our inner state through buying symbolic knickknacks, the onslaught of lavender mandalas, dolphin mugs, and holographic paperweights is certain proof that something is afoot in the collective unconscious. What we have here is one of those eruptions of popular fervor and sentiment that gradually transcends all restraints of taste or decorum. Just as the women's movement, at its peak, gave birth to true believers whose idea of good-looking streetwear was shapeless sweatshirts emblazoned with giant silkscreen Venus symbols, and just as the anti-war movement gave us the sight of otherwise reasonable middle-aged men wearing giant carved wood peace signs on leather cords hanging around their necks, so the New Age movement has evolved to the stage where its public presence is hopelessly mired in tackiness. If we can't escape the New Age, can we learn to live with it? In closing, I offer the following 5 rules for sorting through all the BS. 1. Beware of any product promising to change your life for the better. Only you can change your life, and most products merely charge you money to tell you so. 2. Beware of any product decorated with a photo of its creator smiling at you like a madman. As the saying goes, he who laughs has not heard the bad news. 3. Beware of any psychic channeler or teacher who can afford to have a publicist. Related warning, avoid publicists who invoke the New Age within the first 20 seconds of speaking. In due course, they may get the message and find a more productive job. 4. Beware of getting sunstroke from philosophies that are all light and no darkness. You can't have the yang without the yin. And finally, beware of handy lists like this that purport to do your thinking for you. If this really is the New Age, then you've got all the ingredients within to make up your own rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, when they said the assignment was God and money, I was like, well, I don't believe in one, and I don't have any of the others, so I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to read from this book of mine. It's one long poem, but and in the advertisement it said Lot's wife. Well, Lot's wife is in chapter like 5 on New York City, so you're not going to hear that. You'd have to buy the book to hear that, but I'll read you some stuff. The cities of Madame Curie. There is a broken circle, and a circle getting smaller and smaller. Marie, your children wear such frightened clothes. They shiver, arms crossed and clutching their shoulders. They throw more wood on the fire. They carry the light with them into the caves and paint the walls with their lives. The rain, the earth, borders are irrelevant. When they dance for the dead, it is the future as well as the past. I too was dealt aces and eights, the dead man's hand at birth. I live in the city of Madame Curie. Her hair grows long in the Parisian graveyards, matted and sticky as sugar spun between wooden spoons. Her skin dissolving into chaos. a promise old as stone. Then the mouth, dreaming equations, this confusion of God and money, physics, hovering and slain, cruel and idealized. Marie is the perfect and terrible mother, goddess of the dog days of the 20th century, brilliant and modern as radium. My sister-in-law calls to say she is pregnant for the 3rd time, and it will be a boy. The egg slips and mates. The migration begins with neurons, their impeccable placement, minute homing pigeons of sternum, spine. She says she knows it'll be a boy because a woman held a string weighted with stones over her wrist. If it moves in a circle, it's a girl, but it swung back and forth so. The light of the world illuminating the abdominal wall, and inside a small fish sleeps in its circular sea. Can you say that place is free of contamination, where they never chose to make their home? The family gathered and sheared, staked to the horrified light of ground zero. The well water tasting of metal, the clouds shaped like animals. Test it as the scientists test the Shroud of Turin, the flutes and the flutes and skulls from a cave outside Beijing. Radiation reveals the age. Savannah is burning, Madame Curie. You may no longer stop along the road to Savannah, Georgia. If your car breaks down, don't get out. The gist of Sparta, sacrificing this child and that child. It is all one city built of myth and stone, one singer, one torch song, one backwater blind pig. The day began with us climbing down from the trees of Africa, bones hard as teeth, talking the invisible language of the stars. In the swamps, below the Columbia River in Washington, above the Hudson, in the cloisters of the Bronx, angel trumpets fill the air, fragrant and poisonous. The neighbors gather on my front lawn, in their underwear, bare in their arguments, taken on water. They are burning the wrong witch among radioactive isotopes, where the road disappears, driving straight into the desert, and the light burns the sky up, and the earth shudders from the inside out. There's nothing left but us fish, with a heart and a head and a gun. Each element on Earth has its own spectrum. The same colors appear in space. There's the malignant blue house of the Southwest, its simmering uranium lakes, and farther out, the frigid lavender twilight of Manhattan. The Pope allowed, God is Mother who does not want to harm us. Einstein promised her, we can run fast as light. We can catch the light between the quick and the dead. Fashioning the gods into a cold and dangerous light, a dream like snow. Each year a grandmother, a pale story insisting we came this way. On a hot day, a beer and ice cream day, I count the squares in the sidewalk. An old game, the mother leaning into the child singing. When she was good, she was very, very good. And when she was bad, she was horrid. Save everything as far back as you remember. The Egyptians left us their boy king, Tut, his forever hard-on, his turquoise eyes. We leave behind signs that say, never, never, never dig here. We eye Mars hungrily, as England once stared across the small sea towards Ireland. The face of the moon is Marie's. The night before, Enrico Caruso sang. A gorgeous sob shattering the theater like glass. It was April 1906. Pierre Curie left the meeting. He crossed the Rue Dauphine, dreaming equations. He wasn't watching where he was going, and the horses were blinded by rain. He and Marie had just returned from Easter in the Chevroux Valley. Everywhere they went, they carried that light with them. A strange, terrible light that does not want to harm us. In San Francisco, the buildings toppled. 50 fires burned out of control. The cats ate the dead bodies. The dogs ate the cats. Not a few humans ate the dogs. Egg, atom, skull. Marie fingered the glass tube of radium in her dress pocket like a worry bead. She worked alone in the warm rain of discovery. The horses never saw Pierre. Caruso sang, and the earth opened up 12 times the power of Hiroshima, singing and singing until it was filled and cracked, a cranium in 16 pieces on the Rue Dauphine. The warrior Mars allowed mere hours between the breakage. The warrior Mars stepped back from the planet Earth. He stepped back from the smoke and the breakage and laughed. In Lower Greasewood, Arizona, the old woman dreams the wolves have returned. She says to her granddaughter in Navajo, "Leave," and points with her finger towards the Black Mountain, the talking god. The Navajos say, when the wolves return, it is the end of this, the fourth world. And some say it is the time of the eagle, the last century for many animals. Waltz me once again around the dance floor, darling. I paid the moon to shine for you. It's the era of religion and radioactivity. I carry my house on my back like a snail. My children leave silver footprints. The fifth world is light. The devil with the blue dress is Marie. Her daughters migrate. Strontium, iodine 129, bleeding into the land and the rivers. The concern is gold, and so they don't watch where they're going. Radiant energy displaces matter. The San Franciscans chalk goodbye on the broken buildings. Good night, Irene. Good night, Pittsburgh. So long, field full of horses. Fog on the road to Jenner. Woman washing your hair in the sink. So long, it's been good to know you. Many tribes prophesy a silence coming. It has arrived and stands outside. It's a secret. It's not in the papers. It's in the world. I imagine it bursts and scatters its seeds like the pomegranate. It's a circle getting smaller and tighter. It's not so much the name of the God, but the God's significance. What I imagine this God means. And more importantly, what am I willing to sacrifice to this God? They buried the God monster here, where Hunter's Point meets the bay, draws a bead on Alameda's navy. Blue, glowing, God, monster. The fish eat. The fishermen from Rome say in Stand in Water, the nets are empty, and sail farther from the shore. I walk to the back of my yard in Visitation Valley. The unpruned grapevines wither on the trellis and stare over the hill towards Candlestick, fireworks. The home team won. The moon does its stuff, coming up halved, chalky in the late afternoon sun, red with smoke. The pleasure boats mingle with gunboats. The carriers balance precariously in dry dock. The waters off my back porch, simmering, secret, classified, God, monster, they buried here and doesn't die. Does it stuff too? It's leaking that other strange, terrible light. When I first got here, they told me the dead must be buried in coma or drowned. The horns of the alley bury someone like New Orleans, above sea level, bone after bone. The music, persistent as radiation, among endangered chairs and refrigerators and clocks on stoves and preoccupied cats. The crow, croupier of death, moves from rooftop to rooftop. From my back porch, I see destroyers, quiet as cows at dusk, move through Hunter's Point. The men came and the women came west to build big ships under the light painters love. Everything then was Japanese, the enemy, the dead, the insistent rain. I lived with the others in the tail end of this city, between the rock and the hard place, downtown. The old man from Malta has no one to speak his dying language to. Fog fills Visitation Valley like 1,000 white birds. The city of Madame Curie is over there, inside my black-blue house. I gather up the birds of paradise. We drive silently along 3rd Street to the Channel. The sax player, the poet, my friend, dead 7 years this winter from AIDS. The current takes the flowers. We search the black water for a bird to fly away. Through the dense rain, a lost seal barks, rolled in its dark rug under Lefty O'Doul's bridge. On pitch-black nights, numinous and salty, we say goodbye. Year after year, the earthquake comes. These nights, when the dream hasn't a doorway to stand in. It starts under the sea of Japan and moves west towards us. Year after year, the war effort, the smaller eye of the villager, the clarinets of radioactive women. So I can expect, if I continue, to receive a visit from death. Thanks.
Make this short and nasty. I screwed up and got here later than I thought I would, so I have no idea how much of this is going to be redundant, but on the topic of God and money inevitably spills into the false mirage known as Mr. Bill Clinton. I'm crossing my fingers, but his track record as governor is closer to George Wallace repackaged for yuppies than the person who's the sort of things the religious right said about him. You wish they were true, but a lot of them aren't. And the back door to in the White House for the religious right will be my buddy Tipper Gore, who has not ceased her PMRC activities, contrary to popular opinion. She just knows to go behind the scenes, work with her friends at the Eagle Forum, Phyllis Schlafly's group, Focus on the Family, which James Baker's wife, Susan, who co-founded the PMRC, sits on the board of. They're the ones who want to ban The Simpsons and engineered the queer-bashing initiative in my home state of Colorado. Pat Robertson's female co-host on the 700 Club continues to answer the PMRC's mail. There would not be labels on records if it weren't for Tipper Gore. There would not be the anti-erotic music law in Washington if it weren't for Tipper Gore. She has continued to address things like police conventions on the subjects of music and Satanism, things like that. So they're up to their old tricks, and what worries me is people are going to kind of kick back, breathe a sigh of relief, while the far right and the religious right sort of regroups and gets ready to pounce in 1994, 1996, kind of like they did behind everybody's back during the Carter years. And then we got 12 years of the New World Order. Let's hope Mr. Clinton is not New World Order light. Meanwhile, people I think already tonight have talked about the religious right's new emphasis on taking over our lives through local elections. And if Roberta Achtenberg leaves the Board of Supervisors, they might get another one on the, even on the Board of Supervisors here. So on that note, yes, it's still with us, family values. Way to watch and see whether Clinton means change or not. This is the other point I forgot. Will he or will he not pull the plug on General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, the GATT Treaty? The international trade treaty that allowed Mexico to nuke our anti-drift net laws so dolphins can continue to die for the benefit of chicken of the sea. And North American Free Trade Agreement, which is designed to export jobs to Mexico and other places with no environmental or labor laws, and turn America slowly into another Mexico. Clinton has not exactly come out against this stuff, now has he? So let's hope we don't get New World Order light, enforced on the mind by family values. So let's wind up with one more vignette of family values here. I'm too chicken shit and lazy to think for myself. I want my children to have that comfort too. Just let me or religion tell me how to raise my kids. But as soon as I let them outside, they come back with all these questions. What's a concerned parent to do? The answer is obvious. Ban everything. I used to laugh at those preachers for profit on my TV when we sat around and watched them for yucks while we were doing all kinds of drugs. But the more blasted out of my mind I became, the more I began to see. Yes, there was a void in my life. And Jerry Falwell and Oral Roberts and Tipper Gore and Robert Tilton and the Oregon Citizens Alliance and bless his ego, Pat Robertson, were right! So I picked up the phone and I gave one of them a call. A pre-recorded space alien voice on the other end asked me for my credit card number. I gave it to him. And before long, my mailbox was filling up more and more every day, boiling over with these hideous, terrifying stories. The sky is falling. There's sex on TV, Darwinist humanism in the public schools. We'll get rid of Bill Honig and we'll take care of that one. Filthy rainbow sexual flags at the library, race mixing in Hollywood movies, Mighty Mouse promoting drug use, satanic rock music, and now my children being exposed to songs written, produced, and sung by Negroes. And each time, each one of these pre-printed mailings, there was a pre-printed postcard where the letter was already pre-printed out, and all I had to do was sign my name, fire it off to my congressman, fire it off to all those companies Reverend Donald Wildman told me to tell them I was boycotting, and without even having to write a letter by myself or talk to another human being on the phone, all of a sudden I had all this power! All this veto power! Power to ban everything! Power to start wiping away anything I didn't happen to like. Power to control for others what I saw no reason to control in my own life. And you know something? It felt good. It felt real good. I was hooked. I was addicted. Yes, I am a godaholic. And my checks to the hope dope dealers got bigger and bigger and bigger. And every day when I woke up, my hands would start to shake and my teeth would clatter till the mailman would show up and bring me my fix and I could rip open them envelopes and tie a rubber hose around my common sense and shoot up with God! It made me feel high, heavenly. I felt better about myself. I could look in the mirror and feel like Matt Dillon instead of an asshole for a while. But then I'd come down, 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 and before long I'd need more more. But like any other dope gang, the Hope dope dealer sets the price you gotta pay, and it keeps going up. Money is not enough. No. They want more. I signed away my life savings. I signed away the kids' college money. I signed away the deed to our home, even the deed to our motorhome, and it still wasn't enough. I put my hands on the television screen. I wiggled around my little 1-inch prayer cloth that Robert Tilton sent me, and I fondled his holy cornmeal, and all of a sudden the bolt of lightning hit me. And I got the message. You want to do the dope? You gotta help sell. You want more dope? You gotta help sell. You gotta start doing favors for the gang. You gotta start being the gang's hit men and hit women. Down at the school boards, down at the shopping malls. Besides playing vigilante's your favorite part of the job, we'll pick the target. You make the hit. Do it as quietly as possible, because there's a lot less of us than people think. And we'll start by getting together first and kneeling down in the den to smoke a few rocks of ages. Get our lynch mob courage up and go Bible wilding! Helter skelter, domino by domino, we will threaten them and blackmail their landlords with picket signs and clinic bombings. Get those books on our blacklist out of this here bookstore. We want every record with a tipper sticker out of this here record store. Better yet, why don't you just close down and evict those stores altogether so we can put in a nice Christian-owned business like Blockbuster Video, or a nice liquor store to sell lots of Coors so you can drink and drive and crash and go to heaven and all that good stuff. Just throw them on out so we can have nice, wholesome businesses, and it'll be just like Walmart, where there's no rap or heavy metal for any kids to even find out exists. Or we won't just picket the record store or the queer bookstore. We will picket every tenant in your whole shopping mall. This is the Schlafly strategy. And cost you lots and lots of money, and smear all your names in the community as vendors of smut, until you do things our way. It's better you just quietly go along with us and don't tell the public about it. Just go along and ban everything. I never knew there was so much filth out there. Things I've looked at 1,000,000 times, never looked quite this way before. And the more I looked, the more I saw. And the more I saw, the more it offended me. I followed the instructions in those mail-away tapes and videos from Tipper Gore and Susan Baker's Parents Music Resource Center, and took away all the rap and Guns N' Roses records we bought the kids for Christmas last year. But to show the kids we still have an open mind, we put Phil Collins albums in their place. Just like the PMRC's mail-order tape recommends. And we learned about subliminals in Ritz crackers from that guy who testified at the Judas Priest trial. And we learned from an article on Reverend Phil Phillips and his book, which I wish I could find a copy of, Turmoil in the Toy Box, that too much exposure to the Smurfs can turn your child into Charles Manson. And we learned from those ever-tasteful little comic books by Chick Publications that the Pope is the Antichrist, and that the devil has board of directors meetings with flaming furniture in hell where they watch episodes of Bewitched while making decisions on what young suburban teenagers to push drugs on. Boy, I wish I could get the movie rights to those things and make them my way. And now I know why the dinosaurs died. It's 'cause Noah's Ark was too full. And that's what will force all your children to memorize when Dan Lundgren takes over the schools. And I'm never gonna let my kids go out on no dates. Focus on the Family says that could lead to date rape. And I learned from the Daughters of the American Revolution in Texas why the Diary of Anne Frank must be purged from public schools.
It's too depressing.
Walter Mitty has got to go too, because fantasizing is insanity. And we must ban Halloween for everyone so my child won't be exposed to anybody dressed as a devil or a witch. And remember what Brother Jimmy Swaggart once said, co-ed swimming causes problems of the flesh. Something he seems to know a lot about. Not only that, but if you go swimming, someone might drown. So if no one ever dips their toes in any water, the world would be a safer place. The answer is obvious. Ban everything. I don't want my children exposed to that lovey-dovey, kissy-kissy, touchy-feely smut on TV like Beverly Hills 90210. Wholesome violence is the way to go. And I was glad to read in an Al Manconi religious tract, no less, that the most incidents of violence per hour are on Pat Robertson's Family Channel network. And we rented Jaws from Blockbuster, of course, last week, and sat down and watched it together like a good family should. Next thing you know, I peek in on my little boy when he's taking a bath. And there he is playing with his rubber shark in kind of a funny way. He's got his finger in his mouth and he's moving it up and down. And I go, no, 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 whack, whack, whack. Ah, latex is good for something, isn't it? No, 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 whack, whack, whack. I want my son to grow up and lead a good life and get a good job, and my daughter to marry well and churn out lots and lots of grandchildren. Not wander the earth in search of mechanical sharks to give them head. The answer is obvious. Ban everything. Those pages in Sears catalogs with little boys modeling their underwear and corsets and girdles and certain hospital supplies, all under the counter now in a brown paper bag. And those round-pointed gravel cement storage buildings you see in highway department work yards once you get out of big cities look an awful lot like a giant XXX cup bullet bra to me. Tearing it down at dawn. We must protect ourselves. I don't want to see no more wet clothes, dirty socks, fluffy white diapers, size 42 boxer shorts, hanging out on clotheslines where someone might see them. You never know what that could lead to. There's only one thing left to do. Ban everything. Why? To protect the children. The little ones. The ones we must shield from any point of view that might somehow contradict our own. And the only way to protect them from all that adult filth out there is to water down and restrict all art and speech by law till it's safe and easy to understand for the little children. Because the life of an unborn child is sacred. So once they're born, you can beat them, you can starve them. When they turn 18, send them to the electric chair, or kill them in a war against some starving country who had a population explosion because we cut off their access to birth control. So we'd have someone to kill somewhere to keep the Pentagon from going broke. So ban everything, ban everything, ban, ban, ban everything. Oh, ban anything that moves. We're more preoccupied with sex than the lost souls we saved ever were. I haven't had this much fun since we made little Bobby in the back seat at the Beach Boys concert. And why are we so obsessed to do these things to you? Because if we choke off your natural emotions and desires, we can choke off the rest of you too. Legislate the imagination. Keep people quiet, out of trouble. Afraid to think, afraid to fuck, afraid to communicate, afraid of their own curiosity, afraid that new ideas and different people are somehow unclean. Above all, afraid to dream. So by law, we're dragging you back to the good old days that never existed. Crimes of the mind will not be tolerated. This is how we, your moral guardians, masturbate. This is how we, God's chosen libido Scrooges, dominate. The answer is obvious. Ban everything! Thank you.
Well, it's the end of another evening, and it's just as every other one, you know, by the time the evening's over, I'm totally amazed and awed at these melange of ideas and the way they've been expressed. I hope you are too. Thank you to the band that's supposed to be playing probably right now for being patient with us. Next Wildcat Words is January 13th, Great American Music Hall, Home or Homeless, The Politics of Shelter. And the Writers Union, I didn't do all my incredible jokes about it, but we're around to talk to you about it tonight. There's t-shirts for sale over here, and thanks very much for coming.